How do we help families who are involved with Department of Child Protective Services that are in risk of losing their children? Police frequently tell the parent, who is probably a single mother, just control your child. This statement to a mother whose son might be 14 to 18 years old and doesn't know what to do and frequently joins gangs. So that's a really good question. I think the answer to that question is, has a lot to do with sort of systematic breakdown in a bunch of different areas. That mother is desperately trying to keep her child out of the criminal element, and there's a strong pull of that child towards probably social affiliation and support, the same ideas. Young youth and males trying to be strong, trying to feel a part of something, trying to feel committed to something. And I agree, that advice from a police officer that just leaves it at her doorstep about controlling them isn't the right way to approach it. It kind of goes back to what I said a little bit earlier in the first section, which is I wish I had had better answers when I was an officer for the suspects that were in the back of my car, right? I wish I had more proactive solutions to that. I hope that as we get into the second part, I don't know that I necessarily am going to answer specifically that, other than to say that I think a lot of emotional awareness is necessary. But of course, in a youth population between 14 and 18, I don't really care if you're a female or a male, right? There's a lot of resistance and a lot of growth and a lot of wanting to be independent and wanting to be an individual that makes it hard to navigate some of those dynamics. But teaching about emotional management of emotions and how to connect to themselves, some of the neurophysiology stuff we're going to talk about in the second section, is really the answer to pretty much all these problems, if you want my honest opinion. Now, how you deliver that to a child that's already 1 foot out the door and maybe into the criminal element or into the gang life and has 1 foot in, I think that you've got to flex, hopefully, that relationship, and whatever bonds and attachments they have that you can utilize. Sometimes, unfortunately, they're not strong enough, and a child has to follow a path that is somewhat difficult. I do think, though, that a lot of times that path affords opportunities, though, to speak to them in difficult times, if home is always a safe place for them to come back to. I don't know that the police officer can have a whole lot of advice about that, other than potentially if they knew more about the neurophysiology, themselves, from how it's affected and impacted them, how they've gotten healthier. I think that they would have a broader base of knowledge to be able to reach out and talk to that mother about how to better communicate with her male child in that circumstance. But I do think that the home being a safe place to land and recognizing that sometimes, a child is going to go off, but that they can come back, and always being a safe place is a critical part of that. I wish an officer would tell the mom that and would validate, the work that she's doing to try and keep her child connected, and that the fact she's even there asking that question signifies she's a caring mother in the first place. Again, I do think there's a part of it where we have to look at the way officers do interact with the public. I'm not saying that negative public viewpoint towards law enforcement is solely or is the responsibility of the public, which will lead into one of the other questions that was asked. But what I will say is that the officer has to be connected enough to themselves and not be so disconnected from themselves, dysregulated, that they can even connect to that empathy when they need it, and they don't miss an opportunity to have a powerful intervention with somebody. I think the knowledge is actually secondary, truthfully, because a lot of times you can find some really supportive words when you need them in a situation, but you've got to even be able to recognize the environmental clues and that somebody's reaching a hand out for help, that they're showing vulnerability in the first place. And I think sometimes in this sort of disconnected viewpoint that law enforcement has for self-protection that we're talking about, they can miss some of those moments because they have that disconnect for safety that they experience. So again, I think it's twofold, I guess, to answer the question. One, the officer needs to be more connected to self, but then they also have to be equipped with better knowledge than they are, because my experience having been a police officer and working with police officers is, again, agencies aren't providing the knowledge. They're behind the research. Everybody's behind the research, to be honest with you, top down, governmentally, top down. Until this research about neurophysiology, some of which we're going to talk about here in a little bit, gets into the hands of people who can utilize it, and parents know how to talk to their children about it and can teach them the value of emotions and experiencing and reconnect them mind and body, and talk about can have open greater degrees of grace for each other in circumstances, it's going to be really hard to affect change. But I think the knowledge and officers being more connected is a big part of that.